Pull your chair all the way closer, because what happened on Los Angeles radio this week is about to split the entire hip-hop internet straight down the middle, and I promise you, by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why half the culture is calling it legendary and the other half is calling it the most desperate move of the year. Before we get into any of it, y'all already know the assignment. Hit that like button right now. Share this on every platform you've got, because somebody in your circle needs to hear what we're about to break down today. Now, let's get into it. So over the weekend, a lot of us were genuinely hopeful that the culture had finally moved past the game, Drake and Kendrick Lamar conversation. It has been running nonstop, and honestly, it felt like the dust was settling. But unfortunately, here we are again, because the game just sat down for a brand new interview on the Cruz Show, 92.3 in LA, and what came out of that man's mouth has the entire industry scrambling tonight. Shout out to the Cruz Show, by the way. For those who don't know the history, they used to be part of Big Boy's Neighborhood, one of the most legendary morning platforms in West Coast radio history. They branched off and built their own show. Big Boy moved on to other things, and by all accounts, everything between them is still love. But nobody, and I mean nobody, expected this particular interview to become the spark that reignites the biggest Cold War in modern rap. Because within that conversation, they got on the subject of no breaks, and that is where everything went completely left. Now, if you've been following the rollout, you already know No Breaks is not just some random album cut. It is basically one of the main songs sitting at the very foundation of this entire conversation. It was the first single. They put it out strategically, the day before the noise started, and the second it touched the internet, people started dissecting every single bar like it was evidence in a federal trial. And when you actually sit with what the game said on that record, and then you stack it next to what he just told the Cruz Show, a picture starts forming that is honestly a little unsettling. Here is what we know. The game has a new album out right now, Documentary 3. That title alone carries 20 years of weight on its back, because the original documentary was not just an album, it was a coronation. It was the moment Compton got its crown back, the moment Aftermath and G-Unit machinery combined to launch a voice that the streets had already certified. So when you name your new project Documentary 3, you are not just announcing music. You are making a claim. You are telling the world that the king is back on his throne and everybody else needs to move accordingly. And the game has never, in his entire career, made a quiet claim. But this is where the story stops being about an album and starts being about something much bigger. Because during this Cruz Show interview, the game did not just promote. He did not just rap. He read the entire room for filth, and the names sitting in that room are not small names. We are talking Drake. We are talking Kendrick Lamar. We are talking about the two artists who have essentially run the entire rap conversation for the better part of 2 years. The two men whose battle redrew the map of the entire industry. And the game looked directly into that fire and essentially said, neither one of you did what I did. Neither one of you is built the way I'm built. And neither one of you can tell the story I'm about to tell. Now let me be very clear about something, because context matters here. The game's relationship with this entire saga has never been simple. He has praised Kendrick publicly, he has praised Drake publicly, and he has also, at various times, made it very clear that he feels completely written out of a conversation he helped build. And honestly, when you look at the history, can you even blame him? This is the man who carried the West Coast on his back during the years when the region was commercially invisible. This is the man who went at 50 Cent and the entire G-Unit machine at the absolute peak of their power and survived it, when everybody said his career was finished. Say what you want about the game, and people say plenty, but the one thing you cannot say is that he has ever been scared of anybody. And that is exactly the energy he brought into this interview. People who were in the room are saying the shift was immediate. 1 minute it was a standard album promotion conversation, loose and funny. The next minute the temperature dropped about 15 degrees. Because when the No Breaks record came up, the game leaned forward and started explaining the bars, and the explanations were heavier than the bars themselves. He talked about what it means to really come from what he comes from. He talked about the difference between artists who observe the struggle and artists who were forged inside it. And while he never stood on a table and screamed anybody's name, the people listening knew exactly where every sentence was aimed. The word moving through the industry tonight is that certain fan bases are already at war in the comments over this. Drake's fans are pointing out that the game has spent years oscillating between praising Drake and provoking Drake, and they're calling this rollout a calculated attempt to rent attention from a bigger star's orbit. Kendrick's fans, on the other hand, are treating the whole thing like background noise, because after everything Kendrick did in this battle, the idea of anyone questioning his credibility sounds almost comical to them. And then you've got the West Coast loyalists, the ones who have been riding with Game since 2005, and they're saying something completely different. They're saying the culture has gotten so obsessed with the two-headed monster of Drake and Kendrick that it has collectively forgotten who kicked the door open for the modern West in the first place. And look, I have to be honest with y'all, because that's the whole point of this platform. There is a version of this story where the Game is absolutely right. When the documentary dropped, Drake was a teenager on Canadian television and Kendrick Lamar was a kid in Compton recording mixtapes under a completely different name. The Game was the story. He was the bridge between the NWA era and everything that came after, the connective tissue between Dr. Dre's legacy and the generation that Kendrick would eventually lead. That is not opinion, that is chronology. And when a man with that resume watches the entire world treat a rap battle like the most important event in West Coast history, you can understand why he might feel some type of way about being a spectator. But here is where it gets complicated, and I need y'all to stay with me on this, because this is the part nobody else is going to break down properly. There is a second version of this story where the timing tells you everything. Documentary 3 just dropped. The first single needed oxygen. And there is no faster oxygen in the entire music industry right now than attaching your name to the Drake and Kendrick conversation. We have watched this exact play run over and over for 2 straight years. Artists who have nothing to do with the battle suddenly have very strong opinions about it, right around the time they have something to sell. Is that what this is? I am not saying it is. But I am saying the calendar is right there, and the calendar does not lie. What makes this moment different, though, and this is the part that should actually have Drake and Kendrick's camps paying attention, is that the Game is not a clout tourist. When other artists poke at the biggest names in the game, you can safely assume it ends with a couple of headlines and a streaming bump. With the Game, history says otherwise. This is the man who recorded 300 bars and running, a 15-minute diss record so relentless that people are still studying it 2 decades later. This is the man whose beef with 50 Cent produced some of the most quoted diss records in the history of the genre. When the Game decides he has a problem with someone, the problem does not stay on the radio. It becomes an era. It becomes a body of work. It becomes something that follows the other person around for the rest of their career. So the real question hanging over all of this is not whether the Game meant what he said in that interview. The question is what Drake does about it, and more importantly, what Kendrick does about it. Because here is the chessboard as it stands right now. Drake is coming off the most turbulent stretch of his entire career. The lawsuit over Not Like Us took the beef somewhere nobody ever expected it to go, into courtrooms and legal filings, and the reaction to that move has been brutal. Meanwhile, Kendrick is sitting on top of the entire industry, fresh off a victory lap, so complete that half the culture treats his crown as permanently welded on. Into that landscape walks the Game, the original Compton demolition man, essentially announcing that the real conversation hasn't even started yet. And this is where the situation gets genuinely dangerous for everybody involved. Because if Drake responds, he is stepping into a fight with an opponent who has nothing to lose and a documented 20-year history of making beefs painful, expensive, and permanent. If Kendrick responds, he is punching down at a hometown elder, and that is a no-win scenario that hands the Game exactly the headline he wants. But if neither of them responds, then the Game gets to stand in the middle of the culture and say, I called out the 2 biggest rappers alive and both of them went quiet. Checkmate in every direction. Whoever advised him on this rollout, if anyone did, understood the geometry perfectly. There is also a layer of this that goes deeper than rap, and it deserves to be said out loud. The Game has watched the industry try to retire him more than once. He has watched narratives get written about him that had nothing to do with his music. He has watched younger artists build entire careers on a foundation he poured, while interviewers ask him about everybody except him. And when you listen to the No Breaks record with that in mind, the title stops sounding like a flex and starts sounding like a diagnosis. No breaks. As in, the man has been running for 20 years with no commercial machine behind him for most of it, no streaming-era algorithm favor, no moment where the industry collectively decided to make things easy for him. Everything he has ever gotten, he took. And that kind of hunger does not fade with age. If anything, it sharpens. Now, to be fair, and I always try to be fair before I be anything else, the skeptics have ammunition here too. The Game has a long, well-documented history of inserting himself into moments that belong to other artists. The critics are already saying this is the same pattern wearing a new suit. Find the biggest conversation in the culture, step into it uninvited, and ride the wave until the album cycle ends. And some of the bars getting dissected online are being read as direct provocations, the kind that seem almost engineered to force a response. If that is the strategy, it is a cynical one. But it is also, historically speaking, an extremely effective one, because we are all sitting here talking about Documentary 3, are we not? And here's the twist in all of this that almost nobody is talking about yet. The game reportedly made a point in this interview of separating the music from the noise. He talked about Documentary 3 as a body of work, about the features, about the production, about wanting the album judged on its own terms. Which means one of two things is true. Either the provocations are completely genuine, a proud elder refusing to be erased, and the album really is strong enough to stand on its own. Or the provocations are the Trojan horse, and by the time everybody realizes the album was the payload, it will already be inside the gates. 20 years in, and the man is still making everybody guess. You almost have to respect the craftsmanship of it. Meanwhile, the fan war is already producing casualties. Old clips of Game praising Kendrick are getting recirculated as evidence of hypocrisy. Old clips of Game praising Drake are getting recirculated right alongside them. His entire 2-decade archive is being mined in real time, every interview, every verse, every caption, all of it being retried in the court of public opinion. And that might actually be the most revealing part of this entire story. Not what the Game said on the Cruz Show, but how fast the internet mobilized to either defend him or bury him. You do not get that reaction for an irrelevant artist. Irrelevant artists get silence. The Game is getting a referendum. So where does this all go from here? People close to the situation are saying that what we have heard so far is only the surface. There are reportedly more interviews coming, more records in the vault, and if the pattern of the Game's entire career tells us anything, it is that he does not fire one shot and walk away. He has never operated that way. Not once, not with 50 Cent, not with anyone. When the Game decides the culture needs to be reminded of something, the reminder comes in chapters. And everybody around Drake and Kendrick right now has to be asking themselves the same uncomfortable question. Is this the whole statement, or is this just the opening paragraph? Because think about the position the two of them are actually in. Drake cannot afford another prolonged public fight, not with the lawsuit narrative still hanging over his name and half the industry already questioning his instincts. Kendrick has the crown, and the one rule of wearing the crown is that you never let anyone see you defended against someone the public considers beneath you. And the Game knows all of this. He has watched both of these men for years. He knows exactly which buttons exist and exactly how hard each one can be pressed before something breaks. This is not a man stumbling into a conversation. This is a man who studied the battlefield for 2 years and picked his moment with surgical patience. And now I have to put the question to y'all, because this is genuinely one of those moments where the culture gets to decide what happens next. Is the Game the last real one left, a foundational West Coast legend demanding the respect he earned with blood and classic albums, finally saying out loud what a lot of people have been thinking quietly? Or is this the oldest play in the book, a veteran with a new album manufacturing smoke with the two biggest names alive, because it is the only marketing plan that has ever worked in this business? Sound off below, because I read every single comment, and I already know this one is going to split the room right down the middle. And one more thing before we get out of here. Pay very close attention to what happens over the next 2 weeks. Watch which artists suddenly start posting Game lyrics. Watch which radio hosts suddenly find reasons to ask Drake and Kendrick about Compton history. Watch the dominoes, because they are already lined up. The first one fell on 92.3 this week. The only question left is who the last one lands on. And when it falls, we are going to be right here breaking every piece of it down. Make sure you are subscribed with notifications on, because the next chapter of this story might already be recording. Y'all be easy and stay locked in.